Hi friends, it's Jen Quintana here. I am back on Maui at Haleakaka Healing Garden. So glad to be home. Something has been coming up while I've been traveling and spending some time in Los Angeles, and there's been this kind of theme coming up, and it took me a little bit of time to wrap my head around it. And it's not a topic that I talk about a lot, but it's coming up, and I'm a non-traditional healer, and so when things come up for me, I know it's something that I need to share and that it will help other people as well. So what's been coming up is something related to how I was raised. Some of you know that I was raised as a Jehovah Witness, and it's a very extreme religious organization. It's a fundamentalist Christian religion, but it's very controlling, and there's a lot of abuse that happens within that religion. It's a very closed community. So I don't talk about it a lot. There's a lot of shame around being raised in that way for some reason, and so I do try to talk about it more often because I don't think we need to own that shame. That's not it's not appropriate. Somehow it's like been put on us. And what it is I think it's like there was shame that was put on us through the brainwashing process around leaving the church. And so when we do leave the church, then we carry this shame, and we don't want to admit that we were ever part of it, because if we were part of it, then we've left it, and then we have shame around that. That's very like latent and hidden and deep and subconscious, and that we're not even aware of why we're ashamed to say to people that we were raised in this way. So I found it very healing to just speak about it and be open about it, and kind of just share my experience of being raised in that way. Part of being raised in a religion like that, a very controlling religion that meets all of the criteria and definition of a cult, is that there's some steps that they go through to break down the sense of self, to establish some guilt or shame. They control your environment so you don't have any outside contacts or context, and there's punishment involved if you break the rules, and you're also to be an enforcer of the punishment of those breaking the rules. So for example, if you do something that you're not supposed to do and you get identified as somebody who has done something wrong, then you are disfellowshipped, which is the term that they use, which means that no one in the congregation or your family can speak to you or have a meal with you. That's the punishment. And this goes on for like over a year, usually, until you've repented enough that the elders, this hierarchy of elders, decides that you can be accepted back into the congregation and people can start speaking to you again. So now if you can imagine being in a closed community where no one is speaking to you, but you don't know anyone outside that community, all your family and friends are in that community because you haven't been allowed to establish relationships outside that community. We're not allowed to celebrate holidays, celebrate birthdays. We weren't allowed to participate in organized sports as children. We weren't allowed to go to college. We didn't vote. We didn't participate in government. So there was a lot of isolation. So the only friends and family that we have are in the church. If they're now not speaking to us, we're still expected to go to church. You know, however many meetings. Back when I was younger, it was 5 meetings a week. I think it's less now. We were expected to go to all those meetings and sit there amongst our community without being spoken to or acknowledged, like we were dead. And we would have to do that week after week and still live our life in accordance with the rules of the organization, while being shunned in order to prove that we've repented enough to be allowed back in. And then suddenly everybody can talk to you again. So it's a very terrifying experience. And in fact, we now know in mainstream culture that excluding people from community or making them feel cut off or disconnected is actually is actually one of the biggest drivers for people going into drug use or becoming suicidal. So it's a very big control factor. It instills a lot of fear in people who are within that organization, and people are afraid of breaking the rules because of that punishment. And if you don't become an enforcer, then you're also breaking the rules, and so you could also become punished, right? So it's really interesting. So I'm sharing all of this with you because it's a pattern. Being raised in this kind of a church organization, a religious organization, and I don't think this is just the Jehovah Witness organization. I think a lot of religions actually have this pattern, maybe not to such an extreme extent. However, when you're in this dynamic, and there's a hierarchy that's usually very masculine, and you're expected to follow the rules or be punished, and there's a lot of fear held over you. And then there's also rewards, right? So they take away your identity, they break you down, you have to admit that you're imperfect, and so they break down all these things. It's like there's like 7 or 8 steps of brainwashing that are just known and documented. But then they also reward you with this amazing experience of community and friendship and loving and acceptance if you're in good standing. And so there's this kind of back and forth thing that happens that keeps you stuck in this loop. And so you're brainwashed into it, you believe it, and you think you're doing the right thing. But what happens in that paradigm is that you're now stuck in this symbiotic relationship with one another, where there are people who are leaders, who are held on a high pedestal, who can interpret God's word to you, who can interpret what the rules are, and who are to be respected and revered. And then there are people who are, the most of the people in the congregation who are obedient. And then below that is the children, who really have even to adhere to a hierarchy within their own family, let alone the hierarchy within the congregation, let alone the hierarchy within the bigger organization that is worldwide. So there's these hierarchical structures that put us into these relationships with one another, where we might be really out of alignment with our own autonomy. We don't feel like we can make our own choices. Everything we choose to do has to be in the way that we've been told is right. We can't choose what we want to believe. We have to believe what we're told to believe, even if that doesn't resonate with us. And so as I'm seeing this play out, my family, we have currently 4 members of my family who are no longer a part of that religion, but I am the 4th generation in my family to be raised in that religion. So my parents, my grandparents on my mom's side, and my great-grandparents on my mom's side were all Jehovah Witnesses. And so I have one sister and one cousin who've been able to leave the religion, and my mom who's been able to leave the religion. But we have lots of cousins and aunts and uncles who are still in the religion and won't speak to us. And that's very typical in this religion. And I have one sister who was in the religion, but she's now passed away. She never left it. And I have a brother who is no longer in the religion as well, but he's in a different situation. So I'm sharing all of this to say that I'm in this unique position where I was one of the first people. I was the first person, maybe my brother left first actually, but he was shunned. So he left not by his own choice. But I was the first person to actively leave the religion in our family after 4 generations. And I was the first person to raise a child outside of the religion, and outside of any religion actually. And now my sister has done that. She's raised 2 children out of the religion. And I have one cousin who's raised a child outside of the religion. But we're still deeply but we're still deeply imprinted with the pattern that it left on us. And so we have to be really conscious to not fall into these ways of relating to other people that are part of this mold that we were raised in. So it's like, you know, you raise a tomato in a box, it's going to come out square, right? But then you try to reintegrate it into with the rest of the round tomatoes, it's always going to be square. It feels different, even though it's like everyone else when you cut it open, right? So on the inside, we're people and we're normal people and we're not in that crazy religion and we're not in a cult, but we still feel different and we still find ourselves falling into this pattern because, you know, square fruit is going to fall into a pile differently than round fruit, right? It's going to stack together more neatly than round fruit is. So I'm using that as an example is to say that it's really easy for us to fall back into this pattern of stacking up in this square way when really we're trying to be free in the world and be, you know, with the rest of the round tomatoes. If that can give you kind of a visual of how it feels to be out of the religion. It's like I'm out of the religion. I got out of the box, but I'm still a square fruit in a round fruit world. And so I'm aware of it. I know who I am, and I see and interact with round fruit people all day long, but I also have some family members and some friends who are out of the box as well, but they're square, right? And they feel different and they don't know why. And they would be more comfortable maybe being back in the box, but they know it's not the right place to be. And they don't know kind of how to manage their life. And they try to be in other relationships with other people, and those people might have their own patterning, you know, and they interact in an interesting way. And so what I have found is that in my family, for me specifically, for my sister, I can't speak for everyone, but I'm pretty sure all of us that came out of that imprint and that kind of paradigm that we were raised in, we tend to attract relationships that will meet us where we are, right? And so, you know, we have relationships that are unhealthy, that are kind of balancing our imbalance in a way. They're also imbalanced because they're able to work with where we're at. And so I have a lot of people in my life who are unbalanced, right? And that's just part of it. You want to leave the box and get out of the cult, but you've been raised in that box. And now you're with people that you helped get out of that box, and they're also imbalanced. And now we're attracting in other tomatoes that can hang with the square tomatoes, you know? So it's kind of a weird, interesting world to navigate. And the funny thing about it is I'm seeing it, that it's not just my religion that I was raised in and my specific experience, even though mine was very extreme, but I think religion in general over the last hundreds of years, the very dogmatic religions, especially like 100 years ago, 200 years ago, they have created this imprint, this pattern into society, right? And so we've structured our governments in this hierarchical fashion as well. And we've gotten into relationships with other people who help balance our imbalances. And so it's like, when we're imbalanced, we just like kind of enmesh to one that has the opposite imbalance as us in order for us to just stay stable. But really, we're not actually living in our authentic, aligned self if we're in these enmeshed relationships. And once you see you're in an enmeshed relationship, it's kind of like, oh, I can't unsee that. I see where I'm out of alignment, and I'm using this other person to help balance me, and they're unbalanced, and the whole thing is unbalanced, and now we're raising unbalanced children, right? So I just want to bring it back to kind of I'm seeing it in my family. I'm seeing it in my relationships. I'm seeing it play out in a big way in my family right now, actually. And at the same time, I'm seeing that the United States of America was founded by Puritans and that this pattern is ingrained in everybody here. And then, the extreme religion sent missionaries out to other countries. And so now it's been spread everywhere like a plague. And some people will get upset that I call it that because they're still in that paradigm where they think it's a really good idea to be in their religion. And I'm not actually saying like religion is bad. I think it's that it's bad when it's in this paradigm, in this format of being very dogmatic and controlling, and that it creates a certain pattern on the people that are adherents of it. And even when those people leave those religions, that pattern stays. And even like how I'm trying to raise my children outside of religion, that pattern is in me. And so if I've gotten into an enmeshed relationship with their other parent, then that pattern is being passed down. That imbalance is being passed down to them. And I see it reflected back to me all the time. Kids reflect back to us everything. They're our greatest teachers. And so in the United States, it's very obvious that we have this pattern of, the two-party system in our politics, narcissist codependent relationships, children who are full of anxiety because they're out of alignment, because they're in school situations that are putting stones on their soul. They have parents who are narcissists, whatever it is, that's just causing all this chaos in our world. We're seeing the imbalance in our families. We're seeing the imbalance in our society. We're seeing the imbalance in the environment. We're seeing the imbalance in the increase in mental health and behavioral health issues in the world. And we're trying to medicate all of those symptoms, but we're not actually getting back into alignment, or into balance, which is the only way that we can stop the insanity. And so right now we have these eclipses coming over the United States. I don't think it's a coincidence that they're coming over the United States. They're actually crossing the United States, and they're going to have some impact on the United States. And then this energy, what's coming up and being shown to us is the imbalance we have in our relationships with everyone and everything around us. And how is that going to play out? What's going to eclipse out of our lives during this eclipse season that's going to allow us to step into a new way forward? And I think that for a while now, the next generation of kids who's maybe one step out of organized religion, or one generation out of organized religion, maybe two generations out of organized religion, they've been showing us a different way, right? They don't want to be round tomatoes or square tomatoes. They like the heirloom tomatoes, right? They're extra sensitive. They bruise easily. They don't want to be square or round. And they're showing us a different way forward, that we can be different, that we don't have to choose one or the other. And that's it. That's really like, in Hinduism, we have Ganesha, who's the child of Shiva and Parvati, the divine masculine and the divine feminine. It's this new way forward, and it's through a lot of struggle and angst that they birthed this child who, ended up having his head removed and replaced with an elephant's head by the divine masculine. And so there's going to be this angst and this fight and this battle between the masculine and the feminine, the two sides. And I'm not talking about like gender. I'm just talking about like the energy of it, right? We've been in this very masculine, patriarchal society for a very long time. And we're moving into a new earth matriarchal way of being. And that is not going to shift without a lot of angst. And whatever child is birthed from that, might get its head severed and replaced with an elephant's head. It's going to be Ganesha, but Ganesha is also the god of like wealth and abundance. And so if we can fight this battle out, or see how we're in this enmeshed relationship and give up the struggle to come into alignment in a new way forward, it's going to really open up our abundance. It's going to open up our ability to create wealth. It's going to open up our ability to see a new way forward. And I think that's what all spiritual wisdom in scripture is about. It's like when we get into these ways of, it's very human for us to be in these ways of relating to each other that are enmeshed, that are codependent and narcissist, or that are, masculine and feminine, or that are, whatever that is that we're trying to balance with others. There's a new way forward. We don't need to be religious or not religious. We can be spiritual. And I think that's what's showing up, right? In the last couple of decades, maybe since the 60s, is this new way forward is we don't have to be in a religion to be spiritual. And we also don't have to be atheist to not be in a religion. There's this other third choice. I'm seeing it right now with the presidential campaign. We have Trump and we have Biden. And then we have RFK. Very liked by some of the more, some of the people that have sided on the right that were very anti-vax and very, they wanted their autonomy and their freedoms, right? But also very aligned with on the left where they wanted, it's the Kennedy family. They're Democrats. So now we have this new independent candidate who appeals to both sides in some ways. And so maybe this is the third way forward. I don't know if he's going to have to get his head replaced with an elephant's head or how that's going to work out, but it feels like it's kind of the Ganesh manifesting in our society. And I think that these relationships that we're in where one person is very controlling and needs to be loved and revered and obeyed, and the other person is wanting to be very needed and helpful in that endeavor. And so they've taken up the 10 of Wands, to be the enforcer of the rules, like we have in religion, where there's, people who want to tell you what the rules are and people who want to help enforce those rules so they don't get in trouble themselves. We have now a new way forward into a new paradigm. And the next paradigm we know from a lot of spiritual contexts is the paradigm of love, right? So we've come out of this paradigm of choice and duality, and we're moving into the paradigm of love. And the only way to get through from a heart chakra awakened space, from a love paradigm into a love paradigm, is we have to move out of these very lopsided, extreme ways of relating to each other, these extreme unbalanced situations, into this balance. And that's what, a lot of religious symbolism around the prayer hands and so many things, in our justice system, we use the scales. It's all about being balanced in order to come to the right, way forward. And so, I had a huge download when I had one of my first spiritual awakenings, and it was a heart activation, spiritual experience. And in that experience, I had a download about the Merkaba and about this balance that needs to come in, and how when we are operating strictly from a place of compassion, we might have a lot of fear that we're dealing with, or when we're coming strictly from a place of being loving, but not really having a lot of compassion, we might be dealing with a lot of it's depravity. But what it comes across as is being in a place of lack or feeling that people are taking from us. So, and I see that mirroring in what we sometimes call in psychology, like the narcissistic codependent relationship. The codependent person tends to have a lot of compassion and wants to help and be needed. But they also are operating in a lot of fear. Fear of not being, fear of the narcissist, fear of everything, death, all fear is fear of death, right? And then you have the person on this side who's operating in a narcissist personality, or on that spectrum at least, and they want to be revered and liked and respected, and they're doing everything they can for everyone to like them, right? And they actually are in a place of lack. They play the victim a lot. They think people are taking from them. They're the ones that are like anti-immigration, and so it's, because they feel like people are taking from them. So they have a block on that. And so you have the compassion and you have the love, But unfortunately, we also have these blocks that we're dealing with, which is the block of fear and the block of lack. And we have to overcome those blocks in order to come into this really centered heart space where we can actually be in alignment and still be together without being enmeshed and out of alignment and unbalanced. And so I think that's the work that we all have to do in the world right now, is to find where we can get into alignment. And I might be talking about this all year. I think this year, 2024, is the year of finding alignment within our relationships, finding alignment within ourselves in order to attract in relationships that are more aligned. So, if we've been like this, we're going to have to get into this place first, allow this person to get into that place or get into a new enmeshed relationship. But then what comes in for us is another person who's in their own alignment, and we can be together, but not be enmeshed, right? We can be together and be autonomous in ourselves and be upright and be able to be in relationship with others where we're both balanced. We have like a more equal way of relating rather than this enmeshed way that's very, very unhealthy and can be toxic and can even be abusive. So that's 2024 in a nutshell, and it all just played out in my real life this past week with relationships with my sister and her husband and my mom recovering from hip surgery, and it was just like really wow. It's just a lot, and so we might talk about it a lot more because I think I'm just seeing it everywhere. It's like once you see it, you can't unsee it, and I've known and I've seen it for a long time. But it's really getting clearer for me that part of my mission in the world is to help, is with this understanding that I have around kind of how we're imbalanced, and kind of just put some transparency on that for people so that they can find their own way through these relationships into a more balanced and harmonious place. And once we can do that, then can you imagine if like more than 50% of the people in this country were standing in their own alignment and we're balanced and we're not reacting off each other and we're not fighting with each other and we're not trying to please one another or giving energy to situations that are really just, if you're yelling at your television news screen and you really love or really hate another candidate, you might be a little unbalanced, is all I'm saying. And I'm not saying that any of the three candidates are the right choice for anyone. I have no skin in that game at all. I don't even know what choice I'm going to make. I know some choices I'm not going to make, but I don't know what choice I am going to make. And it's been even like a lot of spiritual people are saying like, I'm not going to vote at all. I don't know if that's the right choice either. I think that we all have a responsibility to participate in our society and in our communities. But it is definitely challenging right now when it's so polarized. And we can see that that's not healthy, but we don't know the right way through. And I'll just say doing nothing is never the right way through. And, I had that come up again for me this week too. I had somebody come at me in a way that was they were playing the Ten of Wands archetype, and they were taking up somebody else's will to control a situation, and they came after me, and I at first reacted. I was triggered, and then I deleted my response and I said, no, I'm not going to react because I'm reacting from a triggered place. And it took me a little while to figure out what do I need to do. And then I realized doing nothing is also not right. We gray rock when we're in a narcissistic abusive relationship in order to not rock the boat, not make anybody upset, and to diffuse the situation. But over time, you can find that you're just a gray rock. You've stopped living. You've stopped having an opinion on anything because you don't want to rock the boat. And I've seen that happen in my family with my own mom. She's been in narcissistic abusive relationships her entire life, and now she's a gray rock. And so you have to really, So doing nothing is also not the right answer. So I don't think it's the right answer to avoid politics just because it's so imbalanced. I think that the way to recover is through. So we have to kind of face this head on and see it for what it really is, instead of treating just what's on the surface. It's easy to be like, oh, that person's a drug addict, so I'm going to dismiss them as being important in my life, or that person's a narcissist, so I'm going to get out of relationship with them and not be in a relationship with them anymore. Or I'm just going to gray rock, or I'm just going to, fall off the face of the earth and not really interact with anyone. There's people that, want to live off the grid and be away from everyone because they don't want to deal with the chaos. And I don't blame them. I live in the countryside myself now. But avoiding dealing with it is actually not the way through. And that's the same for any kind of mental health issue, right? Or drug addiction issue, is you have to actually go through the darkness in order to come out the other side. And I think that's what a lot of the references, biblical references in Revelation, and everything about the narrow path, there's this way to come in and to get through it, but not by getting caught up in the duality of it. To not, it's like easy to say like they're wrong or they're wrong, but how do we say that they're both right? And I'm going to go through in this very narrow path to get through the situation, or they're both wrong. They're either both right or they're both wrong, but it's not that one's right and one's wrong. They're either both right or they're both wrong. And the way through is through the middle. And it's like the path of the Ganesh. It's like the new thing that gets birthed out of this duality. And the next paradigm is getting birthed right now. We're stepping into new earth right now. We're moving from masculine more into a feminine paradigm. But that paradigm is the love paradigm. And the last paradigm was more about free will and choice. And so now we're moving into a paradigm of love. And that's going to take a very different way of operating in the world. So it's for each one of us to kind of do some self-reflection, see where we're at in all of this, see how those patterns have imprinted on us over generations, and figure out how we're going to operate and navigate differently in order to get through. All right, everyone, have a beautiful Thursday, Friday weekend. It'll probably be a few weeks before I'm back on here again. There's so much energy with all these moons, and the next moon is an eclipse moon, and there's a comet coming during the eclipse. And not coincidentally, that comet, the last time it came into our solar system was when Queen Elizabeth was being coronated. So that was, like 100 years ago. She was a matriarch, the major matriarch in the patriarchy, right? And so her life ended as the patriarchy is closing out, and now we're stepping into a more matriarchal way, and that comet is returning. And so it's really interesting to see how that will play out as well. So have a beautiful weekend.